Do you ever feel powerless when faced with the politics of our day, when faced with so many of the dreadful events we're all witnessing right now? War, all sorts of horrible things. Do you feel powerless when confronted with advertising and AI and the difficulty of finding a genuinely meaningful job? Do you feel the promise of freedom and individual expression in our society is not really fulfilled? What is the power that you can draw on in such a situation when you feel powerless? That's the question I want to explore in this video. My name's Jeff Rich. This channel of The Burning Archive explores current events in the context of deeper currents of history and thought and literature from all cultures. And today I want to focus in particular on a very famous essay by Vaclav Havel, The Power of the Powerless, written in 1978, soon after the Czech dissident and later president was jailed, in fact, for his beliefs. I really understand this feeling of powerlessness in today's world. I face it myself. We can't really change the systemic politics of our countries, the systemic geopolitics of the world. We might be told that if we vote, or if we write a letter to the government, or if we say something on YouTube, that will change things. But our actual experience is different. So what do you do in that situation? Do you succumb to despair, resentment? Do you succumb to a desire for violence, a desire for extreme solutions to burn it all down? Or do you just give in and conform? That's the dilemma Vaclav Havel described. And it's remarkable that he described that dilemma for a communist society in the mid-1970s under, if you like, almost foreign rule, Czechoslovakia under the Soviet Union. And yet, when we read his essay today, we feel a resonance with our own experience in democratic, liberal, capitalist societies. Vaclav Havel, of course, is perhaps the Czech Republic's most famous writer. He was a playwright. He wrote essays, and he was a signatory to a famous document in the mid-1970s called Charter 77, which was part of the movement within Eastern Europe to have more legal civil rights for people within those societies. When he wrote Power of the Powerlessness, it was about 10 years after the Prague Spring and the repression of the Prague Spring by both the local Communist Party and the Soviet Union. And things looked pretty bleak indeed. And yet it was also an early form of consumer society. 1970s Czechoslovakia was not 1930s Soviet Union. It was what Havel himself called a post-totalitarian society. And that is perhaps partly why his essay is so resonant with us still today. He went on, 78, in 1989, 1990, he was part of the collapse of the Berlin Wall and was a leader, if you like, a reluctant leader of the Velvet Revolution in Czechoslovakia, coming to power in 1989, on New Year's Day in 1990. And as a result, the story of his essay, The Power of the Powerless, story of his thought and his experience has been reshaped and remoulded over time by the fact that he did live out the fairy tale. He was a dissident who became the president of his country, a writer who wrote this desperate plea for a kind of what he described as an existential revolution, ending up leading a real political revolution and largely bloodless political revolution in the Velvet Revolution. And that success has led to a kind of a distortion, I think, of the relevance of the power of the powerlessness, and Havel's thought to our own time. As president of Czechoslovakia, Vaclav Havel didn't do all that well. Within a couple of years, the country broke apart, and Vaclav Havel's political skills were simply not able to stop the breaking apart of the Czech Republic and Slovakia. He also found fierce resistance by another figure who's still around, Václav Klaus, who implemented extreme, shock therapy market reforms, recklessly so, and in a way to an impoverishment of his society. And so, and what's more, he also very much subscribed to NATO, subscribed to the sort of American affiliation, and joined in, if you like, with the neoliberal revolution in Eastern Europe in the 1990s. And I think this has very much distorted his legacy, and I sense that Václav Havel himself was not ever entirely comfortable with how things turned out. He wrote an extraordinary political memoir. In my view, it's actually the best memoir by a political leader that's ever been written, called To the Castle and Back, which you can explore to actually get more of a sense of that regret, that sense of his original thoughts in the power of powerlessness were sort of lost and betrayed. And it's especially so because Havel has been adopted by, a group of thinkers very much associated with the Atlanticist neoliberal revolution in Eastern Europe, but also in Europe and North America over the last 30 years or so. People like Timothy Garton Ash and Timothy Snyder. Indeed, Timothy Snyder wrote a preface to a new publication, a new edition of Václav Havel's essay, The Power of the Powerlessness, in the last couple of years. And I think Timothy Snyder is a more sophisticated interpreter of Václav Havel than Timothy Garton Ash, but I think they both tend to express this kind of American reinterpretation of Václav Havel's essay, The Power of the Powerlessness. They reinterpret it as a kind of a cry for freedom, a cry to be like America, a cry to be a liberal democracy in the midst of a Soviet communist dictatorship in the 1970s. But Timothy Snyder has recently commented that one of the surprising things, if you keep reading Power of the Powerlessness over the years, as I have, and as Timothy Snyder has, is the warnings in 1978, that exact feeling of powerlessness, that exact dilemma of both the leaders and the citizens of countries in post-totalitarian communist societies of the 1970s is actually a common experience with the then Western democracies, and that the Western democracies actually do not offer the solution to that dilemma. And so it is quite surprising and almost shocking to read some of the statements in Havel's Power of the Powerlessness about the shared problem of living in a lie, living in lies that is experienced in post-totalitarian societies and in liberal democratic societies. So, for example, he says, and here I read from my now very, very old edition of Vaclav Havel, Living in Truth, 22 essays published on the occasion of the award of the Erasmus Prize to Vaclav Havel, published in 1986. That's right, I've been reading Vaclav Havel since 1986. Before he was president of Czechoslovakia and before a couple of his later stints in jail. And in Power of the Powerless, he writes, for example, it would appear that the traditional parliamentary democracies can offer no fundamental opposition to the automatism of technological civilization and the industrial consumer society, but they too are being dragged helplessly along by it. People are manipulated in ways that are infinitely more subtle and refined than the brutal methods used in the post-totalitarian societies. But this static complex of rigid, conceptually sloppy and politically pragmatic mass political parties run by professional apparatuses and releasing the citizens from all forms of concrete and personal responsibility. And those complex focuses of capital accumulation engaged in secret manipulations and expansion, the omnipresent dictatorship of consumption, production, advertising, commerce, consumer culture, and all that flood of information. How much worse is it today than in 1978? All of it, so often analysed and described, can only with great difficulty be imagined as the source of humanity's rediscovery of itself. And here he refers to, of course, the famous address in 1978 by Solzhenitsyn to Harvard, at Harvard University in America, a commencement address, which America was expecting a big, slap on the back. You're the greatest society on earth. You're, the light on the hill, but Solzhenitsyn told them that they were living in lies. In particular, his remarks about the media at that lecture are astonishingly pertinent today. So I won't go into detail about the power of the powerlessness or the correspondences with today, but I do want to emphasise the way in which rereading this remarkable essay is incredibly valuable for thinking through our current dilemmas. The essence of the essay, The Power of the Powerlessness, the famous metaphor that he used was he described a greengrocer putting up a sign in, socialist Czechoslovakia saying, "Workers of the world unite." And he says, well, why would this man do this? It's not really for any, it's not an expression of his genuine belief. It's not an attempt to actually get the workers of the world unite. It's an act of saying, I know what is expected of me and I will conform. Indeed, let me just read a little bit of what he says in The Power of the Powerlessness. Let us take note, if the greengrocer had been instructed to display the slogan, I am afraid and therefore unquestioningly obedient, he would not be nearly as indifferent to its semantics, even though the statement would reflect the truth The greengrocer would be embarrassed and ashamed to put such an unequivocal statement of his own degradation in the shop window, and quite naturally so, for he is a human being and thus has a sense of his own dignity. To overcome this complication, his expression of loyalty must take the form of a sign, which at least on its textual surface indicates a level of disinterested conviction. It must allow the greengrocer to say, what's wrong with the workers of the world uniting? Thus the sign helps the greengrocer to conceal from himself the low foundations of his obedience, at the same time concealing the low foundations of power. It hides them behind the facade of something high, and that something is ideology. How many equivalent signs like the workers of the world unite do we see today? Isn't putting the flag of a foreign country currently at war in your bio, even though you do not live in that country or fight for that country? Put it in the bio of your social media. Isn't that a similar act to saying workers of the world unite? Isn't that the same low form of obedience to a low form of power? There are other remarkable correspondences to our current power regime in the power of the powerlessness. And it is an essay you can read easily for free on the internet. There are even readings of it on the internet as well, on YouTube, which you can absolutely check out. Let me just read, though, a key passage that describes the nature of the regime of power in this world of the power of the powerlessness. The post-totalitarian system touches people at every step, but it does so with its ideological gloves on. This is why life in the system is so thoroughly permeated with hypocrisy and lies. Government by bureaucracy is called popular government. The working class is enslaved in the name of the working class. And as I read this, just insert the changed slogans of our time, you know. Government by party bureaucracies, by the elites, is called democratic government. The middle class is enslaved in the name of the middle class. The complete degradation of the individual is presented as his or her ultimate liberation. Depriving people of information is called making it available, or fact-checking these days. The use of power to manipulate is called the public control of power, and the arbitrary abuse of power is called observing the legal code. The repression of culture is called its development. The expansion of imperial influence is presented as support for the oppressed. Very relevant issue today in Ukraine. The lack of free expression becomes the highest form of freedom. Farcical elections become the highest form of democracy. Banning independent thought becomes the most scientific of worldviews. Military occupation becomes fraternal assistance. Hello, Europe. Because the regime is captive to its own lies. And this passage, I think, is incredibly compelling. Because the regime is captive to its own because the regime is captive to its own lies, it must falsify everything. It falsifies the past. It falsifies the present. And it falsifies the future. It falsifies statistics. It pretends not to possess an omnipotent an unprincipled police apparatus. It pretends to respect human rights. It pretends to persecute no one. It pretends to fear nothing. It pretends to pretend nothing. We live in a different world today. We live in what many people call, those of us who live in the shadow of the US government, the empire of lies. But so many of these correspondences between the world Vaclav Havel described and the world of today is similar. It's not really entirely a political issue. It's not an issue that's solved by opting for one party or another, or one form of political action or another. Indeed, Havel's beautiful, heroic and inspiring call in The Power of the Powerlessness was to say the antidote to living in lies, like the greengrocer putting up the sign of the workers of the world, or the social media user putting whichever country is the currently fashionable country that's been liberated by occupiers in your bio. Whatever it is, the antidote to that living in a lie is to live in truth. Not necessarily through what is traditionally thought of as political action. Indeed, when Havel wrote his essay in 1978, there was no real prospect of ordinary systemic politics, of a traditional opposition. A lot of the essay is a discussion of why a response to this situation is not necessarily to vote for a party or to get active in the party or to do some sort of traditional lobbying activity to write to the newspapers. He says the antidote is to live in truth, to live authentically, to connect with the real needs of real people and respond to them. And that can be done in so many ways. It can be done, he says, famously, by being a rock band that just performs in its own idiosyncratic way, the Plastic People of the Universe, which was a Czech rock band that performed unconventional music and was banned and oppressed by the regime. It can be done through all sorts of independent societal initiatives. And it's that existential revolution, I think, that has really been lost in the post-1991 neoliberal Timothy Snyder, Timothy Garton-Ash, Madeleine Albright, American reinterpretation of Vaclav Havel. Vaclav Havel's Power of the Powerlessness is an incredibly worthwhile essay to read, a powerful essay for you to read, to deal with the feeling of powerlessness that you and I and so many of us feel today when presented with the overwhelming events of geopolitics, and to find that authentic pre-political level of existence where you can live in truth by an act as simple as recording a video on YouTube. Thanks for watching. My name's Jeff Rich. Please do join my community at the Burning Archive by becoming a subscriber at jeffrich.substack.com.